From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
How do you feel about comparisons by some of your critics of this week's scandals to those that happened under the Nixon administration?
Well, yeah, I'll let you guys engage in those comparisons, you can go ahead and read the history, I think, and draw your own conclusions.
As pressure mounts on President Obama over his administration's spying on the Associated Press, we'll speak to a man who was at the center of another fight over press freedom. 40 years ago, James Goodell, the general counsel for the New York Times, when the Nixon administration attempted to block the paper's publication of the Pentagon Papers, the secret history of the Vietnam War leaked by Daniel Ellsberg. Then, environmental activist Tim DeChristopher, recently released from prison, joins us in studio.
There's a lot of things that we've tried, and most of which hasn't worked, especially on climate change, and especially on trying to get our government to do something about climate change. So, mostly we need people taking action, and nobody can really tell you what that action should be.
But first, we turn to a shocking Senate hearing where the Pentagon declared the entire world is a battlefield and that the president can send troops anywhere without new congressional authorization.
Gentlemen, I've only been here 5 months, but this is the most astounding and most astoundingly disturbing hearing that I've been to since I've been here. You guys have essentially rewritten the Constitution here today.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The hunger strike by prisoners at Guantanamo Bay has entered its 100th day. The U.S. military now says 102 of the 166 prisoners are on strike, while lawyers for the prisoners maintain the number is higher. 30 hunger strikers are being force-fed through nasal tubes pushed into their stomachs. 3 have been hospitalized. The prisoners launched their protests against indefinite detention in early February. Most have been held for more than a decade without charge or trial. The United Nations Refugee Agency says the number of people fleeing the conflict in Syria has topped 1.5 million. That's an increase of 500,000 over the past 10 weeks alone. Turkey and Jordan have borne the brunt of the refugee flow. Roughly 10% of Jordan's population is now Syrian refugees. One refugee camp has become Jordan's 5th largest city. President Obama addressed the crisis in Syria Thursday after meeting with Turkey's prime minister in Washington. He said the United States would not take unilateral action to address claims the government of President Bashar al-Assad had used chemical weapons.
There are a whole range of options that the United States is already engaged in, and I preserve the options of taking additional steps, both diplomatic and military, because those chemical weapons inside of Syria also threaten our security over the long term, as well as our allies and friends and neighbors.
U.S. officials, meanwhile, say Russia has sent sophisticated anti-ship cruise missiles to Syria in an apparent show of support for the Assad regime. During his remarks Thursday, President Obama also confronted a number of controversies that have rocked his administration recently. He addressed the fatal attack on the U.S. compound in Benghazi, Libya last year by calling for an increase in funding for embassy security. He criticized the IRS for allegedly giving extra scrutiny to Tea Party and other right-wing groups, but defended his administration's decision to subpoena the phone records of roughly 100 Associated Press reporters. The Justice Department took the action in response to a May 2012 article that revealed information about CIA activity in Yemen. While the seizure has been widely condemned as a violation of press freedom, President Obama said it was necessary for national security.
I make no apologies, and I don't think the American people would expect me as Commander-in-Chief not to be concerned about information that might compromise their missions or might get them killed. Now, the flip side of it is we also live in a democracy where a free press, free expression, and the open flow of information helps hold me accountable, helps hold our government accountable, and helps our democracy function.
The Justice Department has released 15 pages of completely blacked-out material in response to a request for information about how text messages from cell phones are intercepted. The ACLU says the Obama administration is reading emails and other electronic communications without a warrant, despite a court ruling against the practice. In response to a recent Freedom of Information Act request on the issue, the Justice Department released a memo with black rectangles covering every bit of text except the title, sender, and recipient. ACLU spokesperson Josh Bell told ABC News, quote, "We got very little information about the policy on text messages. The document does not even show the date, let alone what the policy is." President Obama has appointed a new acting commissioner to lead the IRS a day after the former acting commissioner was fired over the tax agency's targeting of right-wing groups. Daniel Warfel is currently controller of the Office of Management and Budget. Meanwhile, another top IRS official has announced his departure. Joseph Grant says he'll retire next month as acting commissioner of the agency's tax-exempt and government entities division. The Obama administration took another public hit Thursday when a Justice Department Inspector General's report found gaps in record-keeping for terror suspects who entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. According to the report, the program failed to disclose participants' new identities to the agency that maintains the government's no-fly list. That meant an unknown number of people who changed their names may have been able to fly despite being on the list. Only 2 people were suspected terrorism connections have joined the Witness Protection Program in the past 6 years. And CBS News is reporting Boston Marathon bombing suspect Johar Tsarnaev left a note describing the attack as a response to the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tsarnaev reportedly scrawled the note on the inside wall of a boat in the Boston area driveway where he was found hiding from police days after the attack. In the message, he reportedly referred to the victims of the bombing as collateral damage, writing, quote, "When you attack one Muslim, you attack all Muslims." The death toll from a suicide car bombing in Afghan capital of Kabul Thursday has reached at least 16. The blast targeted U.S. military vehicles. 6 of the dead were reportedly Americans. 9 Afghan civilians were also killed. An insurgent group claimed responsibility, saying it's launched a new cell in response to reports U.S. troops could remain in Afghanistan far beyond next year. Officials investigating the cause of the deadly explosion at a fertilizer plant in the town of West Texas say they still have not ruled out the possibility the fire was caused intentionally. Possible triggers under investigation include a problem with the plant's electrical system, a battery-powered golf cart, or arson. A pair of blasts that happened simultaneously killed 14 people and leveled a residential area around the plant exactly a month ago today. Many of the dead were first responders who reacted to the initial fire. A third U.S. military official, whose job was to prevent sexual harassment and assault, has been accused of carrying out precisely the type of behavior he was supposed to stop. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darren Haas ran the sexual harassment and assault response program at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. He turned himself in late Wednesday on charges of violating a protection order and stalking his ex-wife. Just one day earlier, it was revealed the Army coordinator of sexual assault prevention at Fort Hood, Texas, is being investigated for sexual assault. There were reports Sergeant First Class Gregory McQueen had also been running a small-time prostitution ring. Just days before that, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Krasinski, head of the Air Force Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, was arrested for groping a woman in the Virginia parking lot. President Obama met with Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel and top military leaders Thursday to address what he termed the scourge of sexual assault in the military. His remarks came the same day lawmakers, including New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, introduced legislation to strip military commanders of the ability to prosecute sexual assault, instead placing decisions about whether to try such cases in the hands of independent military prosecutors. According to last week's Pentagon report, the conviction rate for sexual assault in the military is less than 1% in the last fiscal year. Senator Gillibrand cited the report's estimate of 26,000 service members assaulted last year.
Congress would be derelict in its duty of oversight if we just shrugged our shoulders and did nothing for these 26,000 sons and daughters, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers. We have to do better by them. when a person in charge of preventing sexual assault in their ranks is himself arrested on charges of alleged sexual assault. Clearly, we have a strategy in place that is not working.
President Obama's picks to lead the Environmental Protection Agency and Labor Department both inch closer to confirmation Thursday. A Senate panel voted with no Republican support to advance Gina McCarthy's EPA nomination, while another Senate panel backed the nomination of Thomas Perez for Labor Secretary, again with no Republicans voting in favor. Both nominees face uphill battles before the full Senate. House lawmakers have reportedly reached agreement in principle for immigration reform that they plan to introduce next month. The House bill is expected to be even more restrictive than the Senate's, with a path to citizenship that could take 15 years. 7 people are still missing after a series of tornadoes ripped through the Texas town of Granbury, killing at least 6. Dozens of people were injured. The area hardest hit by the storms included many homes for low-income people built by the nonprofit Habitat for Humanity. In Britain, 4 computer hackers have been sentenced to jail terms ranging from 20 months to nearly 3 years for carrying out cyber attacks as part of the global network known as LulzSec. The 4, who range in age from 18 to 26, pleaded guilty to attacking targets including the CIA, Sony, and Rupert Murdoch's News International. Another LulzSec hacker, Jeremy Hammond, has been jailed in the United States, where he faces a potential life sentence for allegedly hacking into the computers of the private intelligence firm Stratfor and giving the files to WikiLeaks. Authorities in Florida have dropped the criminal case against an African-American teenager who was arrested for conducting a science experiment that caused no injuries or damage. The case of 16-year-old Kira Wilmot had provoked national outrage after she faced 2 felonies for mixing together toilet bowl cleaner and aluminum foil in a plastic bottle, causing a tiny explosion. Nearly 200,000 people had signed an online petition to have the case dropped. And today marks the 45th anniversary of the landmark anti-Vietnam War protests carried out by activists who came to be known as the Catonsville 9. On May 17, 1968, Father Dan Berrigan, his brother Philip, and 7 others went to the draft office in Catonsville, Maryland, where they removed hundreds of draft records and torched them. They were sentenced to 3 years in prison. Their action helped ignite a wave of direct actions against the draft and the Vietnam War. And a 22-year-old woman in El Salvador has asked the Supreme Court to save her life by granting her access to an abortion. Abortion's banned in El Salvador even when the mother's life is in danger. More than 600 women have been jailed there for having abortions over the past 15 years. The woman, who uses the pseudonym Beatriz, suffers from lupus and kidney problems that her doctors say could kill her if she can't end her pregnancy. Moreover, the fetus is missing major parts of the brain and would almost certainly die after birth. The case of Beatriz has drawn international attention, with tens of thousands petitioning the government of El Salvador to save her. This is Beatriz.
I want to live, and I ask them to do it from my heart. The doctors in the hospital, they've all been very nice to me. They're also worried for my life. They also want to do it, but they can't because they're afraid they'll be arrested.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country.